Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Say What podcast. My name is Hannah, and on this podcast, we like to talk about things that people don't want to talk about out loud, which mostly include sex, purity culture, church, all the just fun, really kind of taboo topics we talk about here on this podcast. And I am so excited today because I have a guest with me on the podcast. We have Carlie Palmer-Webb. Hello, Carlie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be back.
Yes, Carlie was actually a guest on our podcast a million years ago. Like, we were just chatting before we recorded that we have been following each other's journey since literally the beginning that we started. Because I'm sure you did the same thing. Like, whenever I started actually talking about sex, I was like, I need other Christians that are talking about sex in a, positive way and not a shameful way. And there were just a few of us, but I feel like it's growing now, which is incredible.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. There are several people doing it now, so that makes me happy.
No, me too. And I'm sure that they were there before, but like I just now see more and more coming up, and so it's like so incredible to see more people talking about it. But since it's been so long since you have been on the podcast, why don't you just reintroduce yourself, tell the new listeners who you are, give us a little bit of your background.
Happy to. So I am the Christian Sex Educator online. Mm-hmm. And my background as far as that goes is I'm a gender and sexuality researcher. So I have a master's degree in marriage, family, and human development, which is essentially the research side of marriage and family therapy.
Gotcha.
So lots of stats, lots of running numbers.
Very important. Very important.
I was working as a gender and sexuality researcher after graduate school. And just really missed teaching. The goal was eventually to become a professor. That was the plan.
Okay.
But I didn't love academic research as much as I really needed to be a professor. So I was like, okay, how can I teach? How can I teach outside of an academic space? And so I created an online space and now have online courses for Christian singles and couples, and it's so fun. I love it so much.
Yeah.
And then outside of work, I'm a mom. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Didn't mean to cut
Oh,
you off.
no, you didn't. Go ahead. Talk about being a mom. It's the best.
Yeah, I'm a mom of one. I have a little 1-year-old named Miles, and I'm married to my wonderful husband, Dallin, who is now also my business partner, and we're just having a great time teaching Christians all about sex.
I'm just like in awe of what you guys do. It is so incredible, like all the courses that you've made, and it's not just for married couples. You have courses for singles too, which I think is really important, and just like really talking about sex in such a positive way, really breaking down the shame that a lot of people, when they're talking about sex, it's a lot really shame-led, and your courses are so the opposite of that. And just, all of them are so incredible. I've had the privilege of seeing a couple, and I have the kids one, and I'm sure when Tate is older, I will buy the teens one as well as he grows. But they're so incredible, and all the work you do, and your vibrators guide is so cool. Just like all the things that you have is really awesome, because people would be like, I get so many questions like, I have no idea how to use this vibrator, and I'm like, there are actually information out there that can tell you how to do it and show you the different ones, the different kinds, and people don't even realize that stuff is out there, but you're doing it, and it's incredible. And I'm just so in awe. And being a mom while doing all of this is so incredibly hard, to be a mom and work and all the things. But I know
it's
that
wild. You're doing it too.
Oh, yeah, it is hard. But I know that like as Miles grows up and sees what his mom and dad do, he's gonna be so proud of you guys and just like love it. And so I think it's just so awesome, all the work that you're doing. Did you always think that you would do something in the sex world, like sex education, or is that kind of like when your high school friends hear about that, they're like, whoa, that seems like really out of pocket?
Very much that one.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, no, I had no plans to go into this as a career. It just sort of happened naturally because I was seeking out information for myself. I didn't get married until I was 28, and I was waiting to have sex until I got married and felt strongly about that, but didn't have any sex education. So as I started dating more seriously in college, I started to realize how lacking my sex education had been and how problematic that was. But as I searched for resources for people like me who were single and wanting to wait until marriage, I felt like there was nothing. There were books and stuff marketed towards Christian couples, but I just couldn't find anything for myself. And then after, after years of trying to educate myself, it just started to become more and more clear, like somebody should do this. Somebody should
Totally.
talk about this.
Right.
And so then when I decided to go to graduate school, that was my plan. So once I
Gotcha.
decided on grad school, I knew I was going to do healthy sexuality education in some regard.
Right.
But before that, no, I was so shy and so awkward
Mm-hmm.
and so incredibly naive growing up. Like my friends from
Yeah.
high school
Would probably be
are
like,
very
what is happening?
surprised.
Yeah. So did you have any sex education at all? Did you get like any books from your parents? Did they talk about sex? Like
No.
what? Nothing at all. Okay. Yeah.
No, my mom, my parents are awesome, to be
Yes.
clear.
Yes.
And
Right.
they didn't have anything. They didn't know how to do it. My mom did
Right.
sit me and my brother down together once. He's 2 years older than me.
Together?
Yeah.
Terrified.
And
Terrified.
we had like a body encyclopedia and we looked at
Okay.
pictures
Okay.
of a pregnant woman. And I
Oh.
remember her showing us pictures of a sperm and an egg,
Mm-hmm.
but sex was never mentioned, the word
Gotcha.
or the behavior.
Baby, gotcha.
So I think that was probably the extent. There was something, like we
Yeah.
talked about pregnancy,
Right.
but
But
never about
nothing.
sex.
Yeah, nothing
Never about
like hearing that conversation with your brother sitting next to you.
I know. I
I
know.
know that, like, I know that our work here is really big on like not making it weird, not making it like it's just a normal thing. But something about that, I just like
Yeah.
absolutely not. Like,
Especially when
I
it's the
just
first and only conversation that you
right,
had. Like if we had
right,
grown up having these
and it
conversations
was
together,
normal. Yeah,
yeah.
that would
Yeah,
be
it was
different.
it was weird. It was weird.
Yeah.
Bless my mom's heart, she tried.
Totally. That's what I talk about because people are always asking me like, "What do your parents think about what you do or like what you're talking about?" And I'm
Mhm.
like, they did the best that they had with the resources that
Yeah.
they had. Like
Yeah.
they didn't know, and I'm sure there were books out there and stuff, but like they didn't have the resource at their fingertips like we do, where people
Right.
are literally on Instagram telling you like, "Here's how to talk to your kids about sex in a healthy way." Like they just
Totally.
didn't have those resources, and so I really feel like they were just like doing the best that they could do, and like that was it, you know. Like
I
I just feel
agree.
like they were trying, but they didn't try. Or they
Right.
tried hard, but like it wasn't the best. And so
Yeah.
now here we are, and we have incredible resources because of the work that you guys have been doing. I think it's so important, and that actually leads me to like my first question because what I want us to talk about on this podcast today is talking to your kids about sex,
Yeah.
because I've always like talked about how important it is to talk about sex like within your family. And then once I had my own child, I was like, okay, now I really have to think about like
Yeah.
how do I do this in a healthy way? Because I don't want to repeat the stuff that I've done or repeat the things that I've heard. I want to talk about it in a better way. But I still, as much as like the information I had, I still even feel sometimes a little bit lost. I'm like, I don't know how we're supposed to do this, what we're supposed to say. And then you have your incredible guides for kids and your newer guide that just came out for teenagers,
Yeah.
which is so great that you have those out there. And so I think I was just thinking about our parents because we were just talking about them. And what do you feel like are some barriers to like even talking to your kids about sex? Like, what do you think are some barriers that our parents had that was just like blocking them from even being able to have that conversation? Like, what do you think are some things that even we're like I'm saying like I don't know how to do this. Like, why do you feel like we even feel that way? Like, what are some of
Yeah.
those barriers?
Well, I think one of the main ones for our parents and for us
Mm-hmm.
is if we didn't grow up talking about it in comfortable ways, it feels
Mm.
weird. It feels
Yeah,
awkward.
totally.
So it feels challenging to have conversations with our kids that we still don't feel comfortable having.
Yeah,
That's a big
totally.
one.
Right.
Thankfully, that's a barrier that we can overcome.
Right.
It
Right.
takes time and
Right.
it takes practice, but it's
Yeah.
manageable.
Right.
Another one I would say is a lot of parents fear that their conversations with their kids about sex will incite more curiosity and
Yes.
lead
Yeah, I hear that a
to
lot.
unwanted sexual behaviors among their children.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the spaces where I'm really grateful that we have good research. I like being a
Mm-hmm.
researcher because I like
Yeah.
being able to understand the data on this
Mm-hmm.
specific thing. Data just doesn't support that. What we
Mm.
know is that kids and teens are already curious. You're
Right.
not giving that to them. They already have it, and that's normal
Mm-hmm.
and healthy, and they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually see that children who receive comprehensive sex education early and often
Mm-hmm.
are actually less likely to engage in risky sexual behaviors, and they engage in sexual behaviors later than
Mm-hmm.
those who don't receive the education. So not only is it
Mm.
going to encourage your kids to have sex younger or to engage in sexual behaviors younger, it will
Mm-hmm.
actually have the opposite effect. So
Yeah.
parents don't really need to be concerned about that. Is
Right.
it possible that your kids will be a little bit more curious for a little while
Mm-hmm.
after you have some sex talks with them? Sure. And that's
Right.
okay. We can manage curiosity if they
Mm-hmm.
know that you are a safe place to come and that you are the
Totally.
place to come for accurate information.
Totally. And I think if we're also like on that note, if parents are worried that their kids are going to go do it, I would rather them like be educated about pregnancy as well. So if they
Hmm.
are going to do it, they can at least know about the fertile window, they can know about the
Yep.
barriers. That way if they are curious and they're going to do it, they at least have that information. Cuz I really didn't even know like how I guess pregnancy in particular worked with your fertile window and the
Yeah.
days that you can actually get pregnant until I was like way into adulthood. I mean, way
Yeah.
into my
Same.
20s. Like I literally
Same.
I had no idea. I remember being like a teenager and like doing like nothing, like not actual intercourse. I was just doing like hands and other things and was just terrified that I was pregnant.
Yeah.
Like I have this like vivid memory of like being in the bathroom at church one time and I was like, I messed up and then we did some hand stuff and it got on me and got it and I'm pregnant. And
I'm
like I was
pregnant.
like terrified. And it was like not even close. Like there was
Yeah.
no way it could have happened. And obviously I wasn't pregnant, but I just have like such a vivid memory because I didn't have any education at all, but especially
Yeah.
about pregnancy. Like I knew nothing. I knew nothing. And so
Yeah.
while the fear I do feel like of pregnancy kind of maybe kept me from having sex a little bit, but that still is not good because I had a lot of problems later. So like that
Right.
wasn't helpful.
Totally.
But
Totally.
I
Fear
feel like if you
can be an effective motivator for the short term,
right.
but our goal is not just to keep our kids from having sex. Like
Totally.
we have such a bigger hope for them than that.
Right.
So fear is
Totally.
not effective long term.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I think I was just thinking about your workbook because I've been going through it as we have a child, and I really liked the family values worksheet you had because I think that's a big barrier that people aren't thinking
Mhm.
about. Is like they don't know themselves like what their actual views on this are. Like they don't
Yeah.
know like how much they like are supportive of abstinence or not, or if what they like think about porn or masturbation. They're like I have
Mhm.
no idea myself, and so how am I supposed to teach this to my kids? So I don't can you talk a little bit about that family values worksheet? Because I just think that's
Yeah.
so beneficial, and that's like the first thing in your guide as well. Is
Yeah.
like this part, which I think is important.
Yeah, I just wanted to create something that would help parents to get rid of some of the negative, untrue, shameful
Hmm.
beliefs that they have about sex
Yeah.
and figure out exactly what they want to teach
Hmm.
before they came into trying to actually teach their kids, right? Because
Hmm.
it is hard to sometimes distinguish between things that we were taught that we want to hold on to and things that we're just holding on to because it's what we knew growing
Right.
up. So that was my hope, that I could help parents
Yeah.
work through some of that and decide together, okay, this is what we
Hmm.
actually want to pass on, and this is what we really don't want to pass on. How
Right.
can we actively do that?
And I think like having this like written down too kind of helps you prepare for the questions that are going to come from your kids as well. So that way you actually have a thought out response. I mean, you can't plan for every single question your child is going to ask you, but if you can take some time to like think about the questions that they'll ask you and what your thoughts on them are, that could also help prepare you for those conversations so that you're not just so just like blindsided when they ask you about it. You're like, okay, I at least have some kind of like idea about this or how, what I think about it because I took the time to like figure out my values around sex.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a journey. There will be some things that we don't actually know yet. We need to do some studying
Mm-hmm.
and some praying,
Some
some
praying.
studying and some
Yep,
praying
praying. Yep.
and figuring out what we truly believe about any given topic. Masturbation is
Mm-hmm.
one that I've spent a lot of time studying because I had a
Yeah.
really shameful
Mm-hmm.
understanding of it, and I knew that no matter
Me
what I
too.
was teaching my children, I didn't want it to be shame-filled. So
Totally.
there are some things that we
Totally.
really have to figure out before we
Right.
pass them
Yeah.
along.
I really struggled with the masturbation stuff talk for a long time. And I really avoided talking about it on Instagram for a while because I didn't know how I felt about it, especially once I was experiencing, well, I kind of knew how I felt about it before I experienced painful sex. And then I was going to pelvic floor therapy and I was like, okay, I need to be like touching myself and doing this as I'm like going through the pelvic floor therapy with the dilators and those things. And it just really took me some time to like kind of work through my even thoughts on that. And I think I've come to, a good point because I also think it's important to know yourself so that way you can help your partner, know each other. But then it took me a long journey of figuring out like, okay, I think from my personal views that like solo masturbation, if you are married, is not, because sex is meant to be relational. And you talk about that a lot too. Sex is a relational act and masturbation is solo. And so that goes against that. But it did take me a long time to like really work through that because I was so just like, I don't really know. And of course, I'm like, what does the Bible say? I'm like, the Bible doesn't say the word masturbation. So that makes it, it really hard. That makes it really hard. It's the classic, like, how far is too far conversation, I'm always like, if it was just written down and clear as day, like, you can do this, but you can't do this. That would have been easier.
Totally. People message me all the time about like, what does the Bible say about vibrators? I'm like, well, obviously the Bible doesn't mention vibrators.
Oh my God.
Which they know that, right? They're not asking that, but it is like the Bible doesn't say everything. We have to take what it does say and figure out how we want to apply it.
Right. Totally. It's like I'm like, if it did say vibrators are wrong or whatever, or great, whatever, that would be awesome. But it doesn't necessarily say that clear as day. I'm like, it says like whatever is in the marriage bed is not defiled. I'm like, so I kind of like put that under that, but it's also like, I don't know. I mean, I hope that using a vibrator while having sex with my husband does not keep me from heaven. But, fingers crossed. Just kidding. I haven't felt any conviction about it. But I try to tell people with that because I get questions like that too. Is like, if you're feeling convicted, like you feel a pause in your spirit while using this, like, okay, we need to lean into that. Like that is the Lord telling you like, hey, maybe this isn't for you or whatever. Yeah. I'm like,
as long as you work through your shame on it already, because that sometimes we get those confused.
Totally. Oh, 100%. Yeah. That is so key because the shame and guilt are two different things, and not understanding the difference between those can be really difficult because it's like guilt is not like it's like not a bad thing. Guilt sometimes helps you. I feel like what the Lord is talking to me when I feel guilty, and obviously some things I'm like, I feel guilty for that I shouldn't, like have a lot of mom guilt, and it's like, okay, doing the best that I can. But when it comes like listening to the Lord and prompting me on things, it's like, okay, am I saying I'm bad? Because that's what shame is saying. Shame is like, I'm a bad person. Guilt is like, maybe this thing we're doing isn't great. Yeah. It's really important to work through that. You're totally right.
We're working on it. We're all on this getting rid of shame journey together.
Working on it. I know. So, although me and you did not necessarily have like any kind of sex education, at some point your parents did sit down and say like, okay, we're going to give you the talk, So I feel like that's still, excuse me, I still am in conversations with people with them saying like, I haven't given my kid the talk yet, or I'm not going to give my kid the talk yet. And I feel like we have very similar views, probably the exact same views on this, is like there's never should really be like a quote unquote talk. It's something we should be talking about all the time. So can you talk a little bit about like when you should even be talking to your kids about sex?
Yeah. So sex education in my mind starts when a child is born. Absolutely. I'm not talking to my toddler about the mechanics of sexual intercourse.
Right.
But healthy sex and body education start at birth. We start teaching our child about correct anatomical terms for their body parts, what private parts mean, safe and unsafe touch. All of those conversations start when a child is really little. Yeah. I would start teaching the mechanics of sex between the ages of 7 and 9. So that's a pretty standard timeline amongst experts in the field. Yeah. Part of that is that's when children will start to be exposed to more sexual content outside of the home. Yeah. So, or online, right? So the average age of being introduced to pornography is somewhere between the ages of 10 and 12. Depending on the data that you're looking at.
That's later than what I was thinking. I don't know. I guess maybe just because it seems so mainstream now and more access to it, but maybe it is. I mean, if that's the research, then I'm.
Well, it kind of depends on the way that it kind of depends on the way that pornography is defined too. So will they be exposed
that's true.
to nudity? Will they be exposed to sexual content of some kind before that? Probably.
Right. Good
Something that
point.
we would label in the field as pornography is about between the ages of
Yeah,
10 and 12.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Um, but we want them to be exposed to healthy views about sex as their introduction to
Yeah.
sex.
Right.
Are 7 to 9 year olds comfortable talking about sex? Not usually.
No.
Like they will feel awkward about these conversations when they discover that their parents have sex. That will be strange for them or had sex at one point, you know.
Right.
But 7 to 9 is
Yeah.
when I would encourage parents to start talking about the mechanics of sex. But
Yeah.
again, like you mentioned, those are conversations that you're having frequently and you're having them across a child's lifetime. So they
Right.
start around that time, but you're talking about sex regularly with your kids until they are
Yeah.
no longer in your guardianship.
Totally. And I think like it's so important when you saying since birth because that helps remove the shame. Because so many of us, if we were not taught like our body parts, and then all of a sudden one day your mom is like, oh, that's your, we don't say it, but that's like your cookie, that's not your vagina, or that's your
Mhm.
Lulu, or whatever they're calling it. You just automatically, it just brings so much shame to you because you've not been hearing that your whole life. But if you've just been told your whole life, like, oh, that's your vagina, like it doesn't feel like, I'm sure kids are still gonna feel weird about it, but it's not like shame, it's not bringing more shame to them because
Yeah.
it's like I've been told that my whole life. This is just an ongoing conversation. Like I think
Mhm.
about when I was young, I don't remember what age I started my period in. I think I was in maybe 7th grade, but I had never seen my mom like use a tampon, use a cup, even talk about that. And not that I'm going to be like parading that around my house, like here they are, all the time. But I feel like if it would have been more of a normal conversation, I wouldn't have felt so ashamed about starting my
Yeah.
period, which is a very it's what all girls, most, or I should say most girls, not all. Most girls start, their period, and that's like a very normal part of growing up. And I probably wouldn't have felt, probably still would have been like a little uncomfortable and weird about it, but probably wouldn't have felt the like shame that I can remember feeling of like,
Yeah.
okay, I started, and like my friend trying to show me how to use a tampon in the bathroom at the beach. And it was like real weird that she was even doing that. Like, and that
Mhm.
she's such a real one for like showing me how to use a tampon at the beach. Like, I don't even know, like, if my mom, and I say this with all the love in my heart for my mom, like, I'm sure at some point she talked to me about it, but I just have vivid memories of my first time using that and even hearing about it being when I was way older. And if it would have been just part of like, oh, so when you turn this age, you might, or even, as when you get this age, you'll probably start doing this thing. It's called your menstrual cycle. And, it would have removed some of that shame, and just been like normal conversations. And I think it's
Totally.
important that boys are taught about that as well. So that way
Agreed.
they are understanding what that is. Like Tate walked into the bathroom when I was changing my cup out, and he just looked at me and looked at the it was like, which obviously he's literally 19 months, so he has no idea. But I was like, this is what mommy uses when she's on her period, and obviously
Mhm.
he had absolutely no idea what any of that meant. But I'm like, okay, we have to start these conversations now. So like,
Yeah, I love that.
it
And
just
it's
builds
becoming
on
more
it.
comfortable for you as you practice saying those
Totally.
things to Tate. Then it becomes more comfortable for you as well. Yeah, I totally
Totally,
agree.
which is so important. And I think those ongoing conversations as like are so important. And I'm glad that we were talking about the pornography use too, because I know that was never talked about in my home. Obviously we heard
Mhm.
about it at church, but I was not ever taught about it at church because it was just a boys conversation. And I just really want to
Right.
encourage parents, like, it's not just a boys conversation at all, not even anywhere close to just a boys conversation. It's definitely needs to be talked about to all of your children, all of
Yeah.
your children.
And masturbation is the same way. That was
Yes.
that was mostly talked about with the boys too.
Mm-hmm.
And even like when I know of women who have gone to like church leaders to talk about masturbation and they're like and they get the response like, "Oh, I kind of thought this was only a boy issue." And that's
Mm-hmm.
so embarrassing for the women too.
Totally.
So for the
Totally.
women who are listening, if
Yeah.
pornography and masturbation are something that you've experienced or struggled with, there are
Mm-hmm.
so many women, so many good,
So many
good
women.
women who struggle with
Yes.
those things too. Of course, it's not just a
Absolutely.
man's issue.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, whenever you start talking to your kids about sex, like what are some like kind of best practices? Obviously, there's a million things that we're hoping to do, a lot of them, but what are some just like general best practices when talking to your kids about sex that you feel are like really important to make sure that like
Yeah.
we're doing?
Well, one we've already talked about is
Mm-hmm.
talking early and frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage parents to be having conversations about bodies, consent, sex, healthy relationships, those kinds of things we're talking a weekly basis, right? We're not
Mm-hmm.
having a sex talk every week, but
Right.
we're
Right.
having these conversations really regularly.
Yeah.
Another thing is to try and make the conversations feel really comfortable, positive,
Mm-hmm.
and casual. Not
Mm-hmm.
casual in that we're making jokes about it. Not that kind of
Mm-hmm.
casual. I just mean they're not really formal. We're chatting while we drive in the car. We're talking at
Mm-hmm.
the dinner table about family safety rules.
Yeah.
It's not something where we're like, okay, we're going to sit you down and we're going to talk about something really
Mm-hmm.
sacred. And,
Mm-hmm.
you try to make
Right.
them feel comfortable in those
Yeah.
conversations. So,
That's so
I mean,
good.
get a snack, have a cozy little chat, and don't make
Mm-hmm.
it overly formal because that can feel uncomfortable for kids. So that's another one.
Yeah.
Um, the third one I would mention right now is encourage and celebrate questions. It
Yeah.
is absolutely normal for children to have questions about bodies and sex and relationships. That's actually a really, really good thing. It's
Totally.
very developmentally appropriate at every age.
Mm-hmm.
So when your children come to you with questions, even if they're questions that make you feel a little strange or that you're not totally sure how to answer yet,
Mm-hmm.
tell them that you're so glad that they came to you with that question, that you're
Totally.
so glad that they feel comfortable doing so, and you would love to chat about it with them. If you
Yeah.
don't feel like you know the answer to the question or you're not sure how to answer it yet, you can say that too. You can say,
Definitely.
I'm so happy that you came to me with this question. I actually think that I need to kind of do a little bit of research and maybe figure out exactly how I want to answer that question before we chat about
Mm-hmm.
that. So, can I find you later tonight at bedtime and we'll chat about it then? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
okay that you don't know all the answers. That's not a
And
big deal.
I think that's so important that you brought that up because I feel like so many times parents would like kind of react in like a not great way because they don't know how they feel about it. And it's like, okay, that's not how I wanted to respond, but I don't know. And so instead of just saying like what you just said, they just
Mhm.
react in a negative way. And so if you just give yourself permission to like not have all the answers and let that be okay, I think that's like really, really important as you're
Yeah.
talking to your kids.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
yeah.
I also want to encourage parents to say to their children often that they will not get in trouble for any question. They'll
Yes.
never get
Oh,
in trouble for a
yes.
question. They'll
Mm-hmm.
never get in trouble if they come to you and they've seen something inappropriate or their friend
Mm-hmm.
showed them something or somebody did something to them. A
Mm-hmm.
big reason why children don't come to parents with questions or when something does happen to them or when they see pornography on their phone or something is because they're afraid of what the parent will do or what the parent
Mm-hmm.
will think.
Right.
So you can proactively work on that with them just by teaching them, you can ask me anything and you will never get in trouble. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's like a word that you kind of know is inappropriate, but you're not sure what it means. You can ask me and you won't get in
Mm-hmm.
trouble for saying that. They
Mm-hmm.
just need to know that you are their place for
Yes.
accurate, compassionate, shame-free information about sex and
Mm-hmm.
bodies.
Totally. Because if you're not that place, they are going to try to find it other places, and you want to be the ones who are talking to your kids about it. And that's a normal thing for them to do. Like, if they don't know, they're going to go to their friends or go to the internet because we do live in the internet stage now. So, like,
Totally.
that's like so much information is on there. And I just think that is so key, what you said, to like building, those safe relationships. And that even goes to as they get older. Like, something I think about this is a little bit off the sex part, but like something my dad would always say to me is like, if you're ever at a party, which I never went to parties, but like love that he thought that one day I was gonna be the girl who was going to parties because I definitely was not. But something he would always say to me is like, if you ever go to a party and you have drank or you're with someone who has drank and you're about to get in the car, do not get in the car. Call me. I will not ask you a single question. We will not talk about it that night. We won't talk about it that morning. I will come and get you from the party, bring you home, bring your friend home, and that's the end of it. We don't have to talk about it again. I mean, probably hindsight, maybe we should have talked about it more, but just him telling me, like, you're
You
not in
knew it was
trouble.
safe.
Yeah, I knew it was safe.
Yeah.
Like I knew that, and thankfully I never had to do that. Also, just like never partied, so that wasn't happening. But I just remember that being so important. Like knowing that, like if anything ever happened, like I wasn't in trouble and I could go to him. And so it's the same thing with these conversations as well. Just like
Yeah.
having that safe place is so important.
Yeah,
And something
totally.
something I touched on earlier a little bit is like the reactiveness from parents because I think so many times like people's response to something, even if they don't say anything, their response to something can make you feel ashamed, can make you feel like silly for asking a question, or silly for even just like wanting to, being curious about this, and just creates shame. And so something in your guide that I love that says is be responsive, not reactive. I just think
Mhm.
that's like so good. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I just think it's so important.
Yeah, thanks. So that's just the idea that we want to measure our responses to questions, to things that come up on shows that we're watching. It's
Mm-hmm.
natural for us to be a little panicked, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like that internal experience is pretty
Yeah,
normal.
totally.
When your 9-year-old comes to you and says, like, I just heard the word boner at school. What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? And you're like, oh
Yep.
my gosh,
I didn't know that Tuesday at 4 o'clock we were going to talk about this, but here we
Yeah.
are. Yeah.
Yeah. So the hope with this is that parents can learn to keep the fear, the panic, sometimes the frustration if their child has
Mm-hmm.
engaged in behaviors that they're not okay with, to keep that internal while you work
Mm-hmm.
through it and
Yeah.
respond to your child in a way that is compassionate. And
Mm-hmm.
there may be times in your child's life where you're going to choose to engage in some level of discipline or something for
Mm-hmm.
something that's happened, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that you can't ever tell your child that you're bothered or that something is
Yeah.
problematic, but when they
Right.
come to you with the question, instead of being like, "Oh, we don't say that word," or "No, no, don't talk
Mm-hmm.
about that," or
Right.
"Oh my gosh, wow, okay, that's a
Yeah.
really big question,"
Yeah. Yeah.
try to keep that measured and say,
Mm-hmm.
"Thank you so much for coming to me with this. I
Yeah.
love you so much. I'm happy to chat with you about this."
Totally.
Again, our kids are smart. Kids are
It's
so smart.
so,
From a
yes, they
really
are.
young age,
Mm-hmm.
children can pick up on small emotional cues.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are really uncomfortable with the
Mm-hmm.
things that they ask you, they'll know that and they'll
Oh,
be less
totally.
likely to come to you. So
Oh,
we just have to
definitely.
practice being responsive, being
Mm-hmm.
compassionate, being calm, cool, and
Mm-hmm.
collected
Right.
in these
It's hard.
conversations so
Yeah,
that they know they can come to us.
totally. It's so hard. This is one that personally for me is hard because I am such like I express everything very outwardly and just like everything that I do. I am just more animated. And so every time I read this, I'm like, okay, I have to remember this because like I'm gonna try really hard not to shame my child, but I just in general, me and my husband are both just like loud people, well, maybe he's not
Mhm.
very much, it's more me, but just like our home is like a fun place, it's loud, it's like we're always like dancing and singing and talking loud and being funny. And I have to think about this a lot with this kind of stuff, is like, okay, when these questions come, like we have to be chill, like we have to calm, just because I know that my initial response to a lot of things is like loud or like
Yeah.
over the top, and I just need to like chill out. Like I have to tell
Yeah.
myself that, even not about sex stuff now, just like how I respond to things, around Tate. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, like I gotta chill. It's important to show him that like I experience emotion, but like not to some of the extent that
Yeah.
we do. So it's important. I just, yeah, this for me personally, this one really is like important to
I
to
love it.
remember. Something that I did not grow up really talking about at all, like zero, was like the anatomical body parts. And we talked about this a little bit earlier and talking about consent and assault. And I think I've talked about it a million times talking about the anatomical body parts, but I wanted to have like the last like bit of our conversation just be about consent and talking to your kids about consent, and how talking about the names of your body parts really helps with like preventing sexual assault. And I just
Mhm.
really feel like this was such a area, I mean, in general sex education was lacking, but especially in
Yeah.
this area. And even at schools, like I don't know that schools are talking about this a lot. Maybe they are, I just don't have any memory of that, and that could just be me forgetting. But like I don't have memory of them talking about assault, and especially with like the things online now, because assault is not just like person to person, which that does happen, but people are messaging you things online asking for things. And so can we just like talk about that for a bit, because I just think it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I do love your connection between correct anatomical terms and preventing
Mm-hmm.
sexual assault. teaching your kids the correct terms for their body parts, and not just teaching them once and then using nicknames. Teaching them
Mm-hmm.
and using those correct terms as
Mm-hmm.
they grow up is a really important foundation for protecting your children from predators.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a parent with young children or a parent with older children and you haven't done this yet, I would
Mm-hmm.
highly recommend starting there. You can
Mm-hmm.
say to your kids, "Hey, I know that we haven't used correct body parts, like their
Mm-hmm.
names, in our home very much yet, but I'm learning now that that's really important. So I'd actually like to study them together and then start using them." You
Mm-hmm.
can do that with older kids, but that's a really
Yeah.
important foundation.
Yeah.
Children who learn those body parts and are comfortable saying them are less likely to be victimized,
Mm-hmm.
because predators know that their success in their
Mm-hmm.
attempts is very much based on whether or not the child will speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And children who are more confident talking about their body, they know what their body parts are, they know
Mm-hmm.
what unsafe and safe touch is, they're more likely to tell somebody if something does happen to them. And
Mm-hmm.
predators know to watch for that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't want
Right.
to think about this, I realize, but
Yeah.
we have
We
to.
have to. It's not an
So that's
option. We
such
have
a
to.
big part. We have to teach our children the correct names for their body parts. We have to teach our children safe and unsafe touch. I
Mm-hmm.
encourage parents to focus on safe and unsafe touch as opposed to safe and unsafe individuals. I
Mm-hmm.
don't encourage parents to talk about stranger danger as
Right.
nearly as much as they're talking about safe and unsafe touch or
Mm-hmm.
safe and unsafe behaviors,
Because
because
an
the truth is,
individual who's close to you, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to
right,
interrupt. We say the same thing.
the
Yeah.
large majority of assault, especially for children, happens by someone that the family knows.
Right.
So we have to teach them behaviors that are appropriate and behaviors that are
Mm-hmm.
not appropriate
Totally.
if we're going to protect them. And
Right.
now, like you mentioned, we also need to be talking to them about things like sexual messaging,
Mm-hmm.
sexting, how people can connect with you in online games and apps
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, what people might ask for you, so that from you and send to
Mm-hmm.
you. Children
Mm-hmm.
need to know how to avoid sexual predators online, just like they need to know how to avoid sexual predators in person.
Totally. I back to like the body parts talk too. I just think so much like people who use language, because I've heard people will teach, like parents will say like, "Oh, that's her cookie," but which is just makes me literally cringe so much more than saying vagina. Like I don't cringe at all
Mhm.
saying that, but saying cookie literally like makes me have a body response. But like if your kid comes to you and say like, "Oh, the he at school grabbed my cookie," like you may not like make that initial connection to like, "Oh, that she's not talking about like the her cookies at school." Like
Mhm.
they may not even recognize that. And so that's just another reason why it's like for parents, for you to be able to understand what's happening in your kid's life, like you need to, it's so much easier for you to know that assault happened if your kid came to you and said that, you know. And that
Yeah.
also goes back to like creating those safe conversations, so that if something does happen to your child will feel safe to come and talk to you. That's another reason
Yeah.
why it's so important to create those relationships, and or create that relationship with your child, that the way they know if something did happen, they can come to you. And I think it's so important with the consent conversation. Like, I don't know that I was ever taught, like, you can say no if something does, if you don't want something to happen to you. And, like, you have the power and the voice in your body to say no if you don't want something to happen to you and to flee a conversation. Like, I was never taught that. I don't know if you were, but I, like,
Yeah.
definitely was not.
Not that I remember. No.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what we're doing in our home, and I've seen other parents do it as well, is like starting with just like respecting our kids' boundaries, like not pushing him to like hug or kiss someone if he doesn't want to. Like even with me, I'm like, take and have a hug, and if he walks away, I'm not like, no, you have to hug me. I'm just like, okay, you don't want to hug me today. That makes me sad, but it's fine. But obviously, I'm not telling him that. But I'm just like, okay,
Yeah,
like,
no.
and yeah, I'm
I've
like
mildly started
heartbroken.
to say no when I ask if I can have a kiss. Like,
Oh,
I've
it's the
been kissing
worst.
his face 7 million times a day since the day that he
Right.
was born. And
Yes.
he,
Mm-hmm.
now I'll say kisses and
Welcome.
he'll say, no, no. And inside I'm like,
I want
oh,
to die. course.
You know?
Right. You're like, here it
On the
is.
outside, I'm like, okay, you get to choose. And that's
Yep.
hard for me too, and that's okay, but I
Yes,
love that you're doing
totally.
that.
Yeah, no, it's actually the worst. I'm like, awesome.
Mhm,
Like I gave birth to you and want a hug, but like it's fine. I am gonna respect your boundaries. And of course to him I'm
mhm.
like, okay, yeah, baby, that's totally fine. But inside I'm
Right.
like, die.
No, same. We want all the loving from our kids, and we know that we're not
Totally.
the ones that we're trying to protect them from, but
Right.
still, practicing the behavior is so, so helpful for them. One thing
So
that
helpful.
I have actually realized is is kind of built into my experience with physical touch that I did not even recognize until
Mm.
having a child, was
Mm-hmm.
bribing for physical touch. And that sounds more
Ooh.
negative than I even mean it, but like
No, I know
sometimes
what you
I'll be
mean.
like, I caught myself the other day holding a
Mm.
piece of food out to Miles,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "Miles, do you want this?" And he like comes walking over and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Kisses?" And I'm
Kisses?
like,
Yep.
"Wait, no, I'm not trying to get you to give me
Mm-hmm.
kisses for your food." Like
Yep.
but it's
Totally.
a normal thing to it's
Totally.
just a part of our culture
Totally.
to
Yep.
like I don't know, to want hugs and
Definitely.
kisses from all the family members, and like my
Right.
family is a very physical touch family, and so
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always come natural to me to be like,
Same.
"Okay, you totally don't have to give me kisses right now."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. No, 100%. I think the bribing talk is so good because you're right. Like when you say it, it sounds negative, but it's not like that. It's just so innocent of like, oh, here's this. I want a hug from you. So like,
Yeah.
let's hug and then I'll give
Yeah.
this to you. I have done the same exact thing and had the same conversation with myself. I'm like, wait, that's everything I'm trying not to do, you know?
Right.
Like that
Right.
happens to me a lot with stuff. I'm like, okay, wait, that was not what I'm trying to do here. And I always try to be like, okay, I'm sorry, Tate. Like, I know you don't know what I'm sorry for, but I'm sorry for saying that or
Yes.
doing that, you know?
Yes.
So I don't
And
think
like
I
I
ever
think
heard I'm sorry ever, but anyways.
yeah, I think
Hmm.
it's just important for parents to recognize that this is very much something that we're all figuring out. This is my
Totally.
full-time job, and I'm still figuring out how to do this with kids,
Right.
and I'm still becoming comfortable having these kinds of conversations with young kids. I
Hmm.
grew up, I couldn't even say the word bum in my house. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
word vagina was a
No.
never mentioned, not one single
Right.
time. So
Right.
this is still something that I'm learning. We're all figuring it out, and none of us are going to do
Hmm.
it perfectly. But if
Totally.
you're putting in the effort to learn, if you're trying to talk to your kids about this regularly, if you're
Hmm.
practicing when you're alone or in the car, or as if any of
Right.
us are ever alone in the car, but like
Never.
if you're trying to have these conversations, you're doing
Yeah.
something that really, really matters. It's okay that they're not going to be perfect.
Totally. Yeah, we're all learning. And I think it's important, like, if you do say something you realize you're like, okay, that's not what I meant, to just like own up to it and tell your child, like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Like, I think it's so important for our kids to just see us, acting in that way, like apologizing if we want them to be, kids who are kind and respectful and understand when they mess up and apologize. And like, we have to model that as well. I
Yeah,
know I said
I
the
agree.
last thing I want to talk about, but I do have one more thing that I want to
Great.
and
I'm here for
actually summarize our conversation is let's talk about abstinence. I think it's
it.
I know the bad word, everybody on Instagram. I posted a reel. I mean, at this point it was probably a month and a half ago. I'm still getting comments and I try really hard not to complain about engagement and views and like cuz this is my job. I'm trying to like make this a thing and that is all helpful. But it is really exhausting for people who are telling me all day long that I'm not a Christian because I do not think that abstinence is a form of education. Now,
Yeah.
most of them are reading my text wrong, and that's on them. And it's also on me
Yeah.
for I guess I should have used a dash and I didn't, but that's semantics. But I everyone's telling me I'm not a Christian because I do not believe that abstinence is education. But if you are saying that abstinence only is not education at all, and somehow that has become a form of education, but it's not because you're not educating anything. And so for parents with like older kids who are wanting, or maybe not even older kids, it's because it's as they're growing up, how do you encourage them to have the conversation about abstinence but not in a shameful way?
Yeah. Well, I think we just have to look at the education that we received or lack thereof. What
Mm-hmm.
did we learn about abstinence, and what about that felt shameful?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the shame for those of us who grew up being taught to wait until marriage to have sex came from a couple of things. One was the permanent damage message.
Mm-hmm.
So we were taught that if we did have sex before marriage, we would be damaged in some
Mm-hmm.
way, and a future godly spouse wouldn't want us.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of fear-based teaching. So
Right.
if you have sex before you're married, you will absolutely have an STD, and you 100% will get pregnant,
Yep.
and
You will get
like
pregnant
all
and
the bad
die.
things will
The Mean
happen.
Girls, the
Yeah.
Mean Girls quote: "You will get pregnant and die." It's
And
literally
also
how it
you might
was.
go to hell. So there's
Right.
that
Oh,
too.
definitely. You're definitely going to
So
hell for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think parents need to understand that they can encourage abstinence
Mm-hmm.
while still offering their children healthy, comprehensive sex education. So
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely will talk to my children about abstinence because
Mm-hmm.
that's a value that's important to me. But I will teach it as something that I value and that's
Mm-hmm.
important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Not something that if they do not abide by, their
Mm-hmm.
life, their hope for a good marriage will be over.
Right.
So I would encourage parents to offer all children information about healthy, safe sexual relationships.
Mm-hmm.
All teenagers should be learning about pregnancy prevention, STD
Mm-hmm.
prevention.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you also want to teach your child to wait until marriage to have sex, or you want to teach your child to wait until they're in a healthy long term relationship to have sex, you can do that. But
Mm-hmm.
instead of using fear and
Yes.
teaching them that if they don't wait, something bad will happen,
Mm-hmm.
teach them why you believe that it's important. Teach them
Yes.
about your faith. Teach them about your convictions, about what
Mm-hmm.
marriage can and should be. Teach them
Mm-hmm.
about your experience in a healthy, happy relationship. Or if you've had a different experience, tell them about that too.
Right.
Teach them from a place of motivating with love rather
Mm-hmm.
than motivating with fear. And
Yes. That's so good.
and teach them the truth. Don't
Mm-hmm.
tell them that they will be permanently damaged because they won't. And that's
They
such
won't.
an anti-Christian message anyway.
So
Like the
anti-Christian. That's what
purpose
really kills
of
me.
Jesus
Is
Christ
yes. Yes.
goes very much against permanent damage.
I'm like, did we skip that he died for our sins and then
Right.
said, okay, here is grace. Here is grace
Hmm.
for our sins, and you can be made new in Christ. Did we skip all of that? Did we not, sing, washed away my sins, nothing but the
Right.
blood of Jesus? The
Right.
grace covers me. Did we not listen to that? Like, it's so the opposite of who Jesus is.
It
He
is.
said, go and sin no more. We can talk about that. You can say that if you want to include that, but not that, like, you're going to never be the same and that you're, completely damaged goods for the rest of your life, because that's not
Hmm.
true. Like,
Yeah.
that is not
And that
fact.
your virginity, your purity, your lack of having had sex
Mm-hmm.
is the greatest gift you can ever offer a spouse. That's
Mm-hmm.
so, that just makes the love and the goodness and the
Mm-hmm.
whole self that you will offer to someone seem so trivial when it's
Mm-hmm.
not. It's
Yeah,
so not.
totally, totally. And I would argue that most of those conversations too are towards women, which is so frustrating because it's like you're as a girl, you expect that your husband has already had sex as well. It's like, of course, the
Or
husband
you're
has
at
already
least
had
more
sex.
okay with it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You're like, well, I mean, that's fine, I guess, rather than,
Hmm.
expecting that same from him. That's just
Yeah.
another thing. And when you're using those messages too, if your child, God forbid, truly is ever assaulted, that's also going to add more shame onto them because they've heard you say, like, oh, well, if you have sex, you're never going to be the same. You're damaged goods. No one's going to want you. And then if they had sex not by their choice, they're already putting those messages in their head. So it just
Yeah.
reshames them even more. And it makes them feel worse, way more than they already feel bad about their assault. So you
Absolutely.
don't want to add to that either.
Absolutely. I completely agree. There is a
Yeah.
healthy way to teach your children about your convictions that
Mm-hmm.
marriage belongs in sex. Nope,
Sex.
that sex belongs in marriage. You
Yeah.
can teach that without the shame.
Mm-hmm.
And please do because
Yes, we are begging you,
we have
actually.
got to we
We are
have got
begging
to
you.
eliminate this
Yeah.
shame. We have to eliminate it from our sexual repertoire, from the way that we teach about sex in Christian spaces, because it just doesn't have a home here. Our
No,
God is not a God of shame, and Jesus is
absolutely not.
not a God of shame. Like, we can't
Right.
connect shame with sex
No.
and believe that our sexuality is a gift from our Creator and that it's beautiful and happy and can be one of the best parts of marriage. Like, those messages don't go together, so we need to choose one. And I
Right.
prefer the latter.
Absolutely. Oh, all day long, I prefer the latter. 100%. 100%. This conversation was so, so good. I have people asking me all the time, like, please talk about talking to your kids about sex. And so I'm so glad that, like, we had this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast again and being a guest and spending an hour with us today. And thank you so, so much for the work that you're doing, all the research you're doing, the hours that it goes into writing. I know that doing this work means time away from your child, and I know that is also extremely hard. Or even trying to edit a guide while your child is like eating a snack, and I know how that life is so much, and I just want to you to know, like, I see you with that. I know that's hard, and I know our listeners do as well. But we just like want to thank you so much for the work that you and Dallin are doing, and it's truly so important. So where can people find all of your incredible like guides and offers and your freebies and all your things? Like, I'll link it in the episode notes, but where can people find you?
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you for the
Of
work that you're
course.
doing too. Every time
Oh,
someone
thank you.
reaches out to me that's struggling with vaginismus, I'm like, listen, you
Mm.
have to go follow Hannah.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Um, well, you just eliminate shame around that too, which I really appreciate. Okay, so
Thank
the
you.
Christian Sex Educator is where you can find all my stuff. So my Instagram is the
Hmm.
Christian Sex Educator. My website is thechristiansexeducator.com. If you go
Awesome.
onto my website, thechristiansexeducator.com, in the menu there's a tab for parents.
Hmm.
And all of my resources for parents are there. There's some podcast episodes that might be helpful. There's the Teaching
Hmm.
Kids guide and the Teaching Teens guide. You can find both
Hmm.
there. And if you're
Perfect.
wanting to see inside of the guide before you
Hmm.
purchase, or just don't feel like you want to purchase but you'd like a little bit of help, on
Yeah.
that page as well, you can download some of the pages from the guide for free.
Hmm.
So you can get
Fantastic.
those as well.
That's really helpful. And if anything, if you ever update your guides, we get the guides if we've purchased it as well, which I
Yep,
think is really great because things change, research changes, new things
totally.
come up, and so it's really
Yeah,
good
we'll
to
have
like
new
go for
technology,
that.
everything. Yeah, so it's
Totally.
lifetime access. You'll get all the
Yes.
updates for as long as we both shall live.
Yes.
So,
Yes. I can personally vouch for the no, I feel like you changed the name. It was the honeymoon course. Did you change it?
no,
I
it's
feel
still
like
the
it's
honeymoon course.
okay. So the honeymoon course, that's right. Okay, so
Yeah,
we have I've seen the honeymoon course and I have the kids one, and I mean I know they're all great. I can personally vouch for those, and they're just truly incredible. So so helpful, especially if you don't have kids yet, but you've listened to this episode because you like the podcast and you like Carlie. I know that is a super helpful guide as well. I think it's got such good information in there. That course is fantastic. But and so
thank
is
you.
the kid ones. So I will link all that in the episode notes. Make sure you go follow Carlie on Instagram and visit her website. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was so great.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the important work that you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, friends, love you so much, and we will talk soon.